The massive spaceship, Serenity, cut through the darkness of space, its hull gleaming under the light of distant stars. Inside, the crew was buzzing with nervous energy as they approached their destination. Cathara 7 hung before them like a white marble, its surface completely covered in ice and snow. This wasn't just any frozen planet, though. This was one of the most dangerous worlds in the galaxy, where temperatures dropped so low that most living things would die within minutes of stepping outside. Dr. Hyunwoo Kim stood at the observation deck, watching the planet grow larger as they approached. He was the mission leader, a calm and experienced man who had led dozens of dangerous expeditions before. But this one was different. This time they weren't just exploring. They were going to build the first human research station on Cathara 7, a planet so cold that 3 previous alien expeditions had failed completely. Behind him, the ship was filled with activity. The alien crew members were working frantically to prepare for the landing. The Vorthak looked like walking crystals, their bodies made of a clear, diamond-like material that sparkled under the ship's lights. They had been working for weeks on special heating suits that used more power than some small spacecraft. Every few minutes, one of them would test their equipment again, checking and double-checking that everything was working perfectly. The Zilani crew members were just as busy. These amphibious beings normally lived in warm, humid environments, and the thought of Cathara 7's frozen surface terrified them. Their skin was smooth and wet, designed for underwater life, and they had built elaborate environmental suits that looked more like small submarines than clothing. These suits had multiple heating systems, humidity controls, and backup power supplies that could run for days. The insectoid theks were perhaps the most concerned of all. Their thin, chitinous bodies were built for warm climates, and they had created heating systems so complex that they needed 3 engineers just to operate them. Their suits were massive, bulky things that made them look like walking furnaces. Steam constantly leaked from the joints as the heating elements worked overtime to keep them warm. Hyunwoo couldn't help but smile as he watched all this preparation. In another part of the ship, his human team was getting ready too, but their approach was completely different. Geologist Jiho Park was casually packing what looked like ordinary winter clothes: heavy jackets, thick boots, warm gloves, and simple face masks. To anyone watching, it looked like he was getting ready for a skiing trip, not a mission to one of the most dangerous planets in the galaxy. Engineer So Young Lee was doing the same thing. She had a small bag filled with basic winter gear, some chemical hand warmers, and a thermos for hot coffee. That was it. No complex machinery, no backup heating systems, no emergency power supplies. Just simple, practical clothing that humans had been using for thousands of years. The contrast was striking. While the aliens needed technology that cost millions of credits and required teams of specialists to operate, the humans were preparing with gear that cost less than a nice dinner. When Vorthak engineer Rix 4 saw what the humans were packing, his crystal face showed genuine concern. "Dr. Kim," Rix 4 said, his voice ringing like wind chimes, "I must express my worry about your team's equipment. The surface temperature of Cathara 7 will reach -80 degrees Celsius. Your clothing appears insufficient for such extreme conditions. Perhaps we could share some of our heating technology." Hyunwoo looked at the alien's elaborate suit, which was humming with power and covered in blinking lights. Then he looked at his own simple winter jacket hanging nearby. The difference was almost comical. But instead of being concerned, Hyunwoo just smiled that quiet smile that his team knew so well. "Thank you for your concern, Rix 4, he said in his calm, steady voice. "But we'll be fine. Humans have been dealing with cold weather for a very long time." The Vorthak engineer didn't look convinced. In fact, none of the aliens looked convinced. They had studied human physiology and knew that humans were warm-blooded creatures who needed to maintain a specific body temperature to survive. How could these simple clothes possibly protect them in conditions that would kill most life forms in the galaxy? What the aliens didn't understand was that humans came from a planet that had already tried to kill them with cold. For millions of years, Earth had thrown ice ages, blizzards, and freezing temperatures at humanity's ancestors. And somehow, impossibly, humans had not just survived, but thrived. They had learned to make fire, build shelters, and create clothing that could keep them warm in the harshest conditions imaginable. As the Serenity entered Cathara 7's orbit, the ship's sensors began transmitting data about the planet's surface. The readings were terrifying. Howling winds that could knock over a small building, ice storms that could strip the paint off a spacecraft, and temperatures so cold that the air itself seemed to freeze. The aliens checked their equipment one more time, running final diagnostics on their heating systems. The humans just zipped up their jackets and smiled. The shuttle's engines roared as it broke through Cathara 7's atmosphere, shaking violently as it fought against the planet's brutal weather. Through the small windows, the crew could see nothing but white. Snow and ice crystals whipped past so fast they looked like streaks of light. The wind was screaming so loudly that it drowned out the shuttle's engines, creating an otherworldly howl that made even the bravest crew members feel uneasy. When the shuttle finally touched down with a heavy thud, the pilot's voice crackled through the intercom. Landing successful, but barely. Wind speeds are hitting 120 kilometers per hour, and visibility is almost zero. Temperature reading shows minus 78 degrees Celsius. Good luck out there. The alien crew members began their final preparations. The Vorthak engineers activated their heating suits, and immediately the cabin filled with the hum of powerful energy cells working at maximum capacity. Warning lights blinked on their chest displays, showing that their heating systems were already working harder than expected. The Zilani biologists sealed themselves into their submarine-like environmental suits, and the sound of multiple air pumps and heaters created a constant mechanical chorus. The insectoid theks were the most dramatic. Their massive heating suits required 2 crew members to help them put on, and once activated, steam began pouring from every joint and seam. They looked like walking boilers, and the heat radiating from their suits was so intense that it fogged up the shuttle's windows. Then the shuttle door opened, and hell itself seemed to pour inside. The wind hit them like a physical blow, carrying with it billions of ice crystals that felt like tiny needles against any exposed surface. The sound was deafening, a constant roar that made communication almost impossible. The aliens huddled together, their heating suits working overtime just to keep them alive in the first few seconds. But then something incredible happened that none of them were prepared for. The humans just walked out. Dr. Hyunwoo Kim stepped onto the frozen surface wearing nothing more than a heavy winter coat, thick boots, and a simple face mask. The wind that was threatening to knock over the heavily armored aliens barely seemed to affect him. He walked with confident steps across the ice, his breath forming small clouds in the frozen air, but otherwise showing no signs of distress. Behind him, geologist Ji-Ho Park emerged from the shuttle carrying his equipment bag. He was wearing a thick jacket and insulated pants, but compared to the aliens' elaborate suits, he might as well have been wearing pajamas. The most shocking thing was how casually he moved. While the aliens struggled to take each step in their bulky suits, Park walked across the ice like he was strolling through a park on a spring day. "Interesting rock formations over here," Park called out, his voice somehow cutting through the howling wind. He knelt down next to what looked like a frozen boulder and began examining it closely. Then, to the absolute horror of every alien watching, he pulled off his gloves. His bare hands touched the frozen rock. In temperatures that should have caused instant frostbite, Ji-Ho Park was handling samples with his naked fingers. The Zilani biologist Tel 9 rushed over as quickly as his bulky suit would allow. His voice panicked through the communication system. "Park, your hands! The exposure will cause immediate tissue damage. The temperature will freeze your skin in seconds." Park looked up from his work, snowflakes gathering on his eyebrows, and actually laughed. Not a nervous laugh or a crazy laugh, but the kind of laugh someone makes when they hear a mildly funny joke. This is nothing," he said, flexing his fingers to show they were working perfectly. "You should have seen last winter in Seoul. We had a cold snap that was way worse than this. I had to walk to work every day in conditions that would make this look like a warm summer evening." The aliens stared in complete disbelief. According to every scientific model they had, Park's hands should have been frozen solid. His blood should have started crystallizing. His skin should have turned black with frostbite. Instead, he was working efficiently, picking up samples, examining them closely, and even taking notes with a pencil that somehow still worked in the killing cold. Engineer So-Young Lee was having similar success with her equipment setup. While the aliens struggled to operate their complex heating systems through thick, insulated gloves, Lee was assembling delicate scientific instruments with her bare hands. Occasionally, she would blow on her fingers to warm them up, but it seemed more like a habit than a necessity. "The wind's picking up," she called out to the group, raising her voice to be heard over the storm. "We should get the main equipment secured before it gets really bad." "Really bad?" The aliens looked at each other in amazement. The wind was already strong enough to knock them over. The temperature was low enough to kill most life forms in the galaxy. Ice crystals were hitting their suits so hard that they sounded like bullets. And the human engineer was worried about it getting really bad? What made it even more incredible was how efficiently the humans worked. While the aliens moved slowly and carefully, constantly checking their heating systems and energy levels, the humans moved with practiced ease. Park collected his samples in minutes instead of hours. Lee assembled complex equipment as if she were working in a comfortable laboratory, instead of on the surface of a frozen hell world. The aliens' energy meters were already showing yellow warnings. In just 1 hour on the surface, their advanced heating systems had consumed more power than they normally used in a full day. At this rate, their suits would run out of energy long before the mission was complete. Meanwhile, the humans showed no signs of slowing down. They worked steadily, efficiently, and most shocking of all, they seemed completely comfortable. Hyunwoo. Kim was actually smiling as he supervised the setup, occasionally brushing snow off his jacket like it was a minor inconvenience. The contrast was so stark that it began to change how the aliens thought about humans entirely. These weren't just another species that had developed technology to survive in harsh environments. These were creatures who had been shaped by harsh environments, who had evolved to thrive in conditions that would kill almost everything else in the galaxy. As the first day on Cathara 7 continued, one thing became crystal clear to every alien on the mission. They weren't just witnessing human survival. They were witnessing something that shouldn't have been possible according to everything they knew about biology and physics. They were watching humans treat a death world like home. The solar storm hit without warning, like an invisible hammer, striking the planet from space. One moment everything was working perfectly, and the next moment alarms were screaming throughout the base camp. The expedition's main power grid, which had been running smoothly for days, suddenly went completely dead. Emergency lights flickered on for a few seconds, then they died too. The only sounds left were the howling wind outside and the terrified voices of the alien crew members. In the darkness, panic began to spread like wildfire. The aliens' sophisticated environmental suits, which had been working overtime just to keep them alive, started displaying red warning messages. Power levels dropped from yellow to orange to red in a matter of minutes. The heating elements that had been pumping out life-saving warmth began to stutter and fail. Vorthak engineer Rixfor's crystal body began to dim as his suit lost power. His voice, normally clear and musical, became shaky with fear. Emergency power at 15% and falling. Heating systems failing. Core temperature dropping rapidly. Other Vorthak crew members were experiencing the same crisis. Their crystal bodies, which normally glowed with inner light, were becoming darker and more brittle as the cold began to seep in. The Zilani were even worse off. These amphibious beings needed warmth and humidity to survive, and their submarine-like suits were designed to provide both. But as power failed, the heating and humidity systems shut down one by one. Tel 9, the Zilani biologist, was shivering so violently that his suit's internal gyroscopes couldn't compensate. His smooth, wet skin was beginning to dry out and crack in the freezing air. The insectoid Theks were facing their own nightmare. Their massive heating suits, which had been pumping out steam like locomotives, were now cold and dead. Without the constant heat, their thin exoskeletons began to contract and become brittle. Some of them were already having trouble moving their joints as the cold affected their insect-like biology. In the middle of all this chaos and panic, Dr. Hyunwoo Kim's voice cut through the darkness, like a calm anchor in a storm. "Everyone stay calm," he said, his voice steady and reassuring. "We're going to implement winter survival procedures. Humans, gather around me. Aliens, don't move too much to conserve your remaining power." While the aliens stood frozen in terror, literally and figuratively, the human crew members began moving. with purpose and efficiency. They didn't seem panicked at all. In fact, they seemed almost prepared for this situation. Jiho Park began gathering materials from around the base camp. Broken equipment panels, supply crates, pieces of insulation, anything that could be used to build shelter. Just like winter camping in the mountains, he said to So-Young Lee, who was helping him move the heavier pieces. Engineer So-Young Lee nodded and began constructing what she called wind barriers. Using salvaged materials and some basic engineering principles, she created walls and screens that would block the worst of the wind and create small pockets of relatively calm air. Her hands worked efficiently in the cold, assembling the barriers like she had done this 1,000 times before. Communication specialist Min Ho Choi appeared with a bag of small packets that looked almost insignificant compared to the aliens' massive heating systems. Chemical heat packs, he announced, beginning to distribute them. These will provide heat for about 8 hours each. We need to use them carefully and share them with our alien friends. The aliens watched in amazement as the humans began implementing what they called a buddy system. Each human paired up with one or more aliens, sharing their body heat in the most efficient way possible. Dr. Hyun-Woo Kim gently guided the shivering Vorthak engineer Rix 4 to sit close to him, wrapping both of them in a salvaged thermal blanket. Body heat is one of the most reliable heating sources, Hyun-Woo explained calmly, as if he were teaching a class instead of fighting for survival on a frozen death world. Humans have been using this technique for thousands of years. Our bodies generate heat naturally, and by sharing it, we can keep everyone warm. The most incredible thing was how comfortable the humans seemed with the entire situation. While the aliens were experiencing what they thought might be their final hours, the humans were actually relaxed. Park was telling stories about winter, camping trips he had taken in the Korean mountains. Lee was explaining how her grandmother had survived harsh winters during the war, with nothing but layered clothing and shared warmth. As night fell, the temperature dropped even further. The aliens' instruments, what few were still working, showed readings that should have been lethal to any warm-blooded creature. Yet the humans not only survived, but continued to work efficiently, adjusting their makeshift shelters, redistributing heat packs, and keeping everyone's spirits up with casual conversation. Min Ho Choi was sharing a heat pack with 2 Thex crew members, both of whom were pressed against him for warmth. "This reminds me of a hiking trip I took last winter," he said conversationally. "We got caught in a blizzard on Mount Siorak and had to shelter in a cave for 2 days. The temperature dropped to -40, but we were fine. Just had to share warmth and wait it out." The aliens listened to these stories with growing amazement. The humans were talking about surviving in conditions that would require massive technological intervention for any other species, and they were describing it like it was just an inconvenient camping trip. Zilani biologist Tel 9, who was sharing warmth with engineer So-Young Lee, managed to speak through his chattering. How is this possible? According to our biological models, your species should not be able to survive these temperatures without technological assistance." Lee smiled and adjusted the thermal blanket they were sharing. "Humans are tough," she said simply. "We come from a planet that tried to kill us with cold for millions of years. Ice ages, blizzards, winters that lasted for months. Our ancestors learned to survive, and they passed those abilities down to us. Throughout the long, dark night, the humans kept everyone alive through nothing more than shared body heat, simple chemical heat packs, and basic survival knowledge that had been passed down through generations. They rotated positions to ensure everyone stayed warm, shared their limited supplies equally, and maintained a calm, confident attitude that helped keep panic at bay. When morning finally came and the solar storm passed, allowing power to be restored, the aliens realized something that would change their understanding of humans forever. They hadn't just survived the night because of human help. They had survived because they were in the presence of beings who had been forged by one of the harshest planets in the galaxy, creatures who treated lethal cold as just another inconvenience to be managed with common sense and cooperation. As the long night continued, and the humans worked tirelessly to keep everyone alive, something unexpected began to happen. The aliens, huddled close to their human companions for warmth, started asking questions. What began as desperate attempts to understand how the humans were surviving gradually turned into conversations that would shatter everything the aliens thought they knew about Earth and its people. It started when Vorthak engineer Rix 4, still pressed against Dr. Hyun-Woo Kim for warmth, noticed that the humans' body temperature seemed remarkably stable, despite the killing cold around them. His crystal sensors, even with limited power, could detect that Kim was generating heat at a steady rate without any technological assistance. Dr. Kim, Rix 4 said, his voice still shaky from the cold, how are you maintaining thermal output in these conditions? Your body appears to be functioning as an independent heating unit. Kim chuckled softly, adjusting the thermal blanket they shared. That's just normal human biology. Our bodies are designed to generate heat constantly. We have to eat food to fuel that heat production, but it's completely automatic. We don't even think about it. This simple statement sent shockwaves through the alien crew. The Vorthak had always assumed that humans, like most species, relied primarily on external heat sources and technological assistance to survive in cold environments. The idea that they were walking heating units was revolutionary. Communications specialist Min-Ho Choi, who was sharing warmth with 2 Thex crew members, began telling them about his childhood winters in Busan. When I was a kid, we used to have these massive snowstorms every winter. Sometimes the snow would pile up so high that it reached the second-floor windows of houses. School would be canceled, but we kids would spend all day outside building snow forts and having snowball fights. The Thex crew members listened in growing amazement. Min-Ho was describing children playing in conditions that would require their species to mobilize emergency heating systems for entire cities. He was talking about it like it was fun, like it was something to look forward to rather than a deadly crisis. The temperature would drop to maybe -20 degrees Celsius. Min-Ho continued casually, and we'd stay outside for hours. Our parents would make us come in every few hours to warm up and drink hot chocolate, but then we'd go right back out. Some of my best childhood memories are from those winter days. The aliens exchanged glances that would have been shocked if they weren't so focused on survival. -20 degrees Celsius was cold enough to shut down most of their homeworld's infrastructure. The idea of children voluntarily spending hours playing in such conditions was almost incomprehensible. Engineer So-Young Lee, who was keeping 3 Zilani crew members warm, began sharing stories about her work experience. I spent 2 years working at a research station in Antarctica. That's the coldest continent on Earth. The temperature there regularly drops to -40 or 50 degrees Celsius, and that's considered a normal working environment. She pulled out her tablet, which somehow still functioned despite the cold, and began showing them pictures. The screen displayed images of humans working outside in conditions that looked even more hostile than Cathera 7. People in simple winter clothing were operating complex equipment, building structures, and conducting research in landscapes of pure white ice and snow. This is McMurdo Station, Lee explained, showing them a picture of buildings and vehicles surrounded by endless ice. About 1,000 people live and work there year-round. They have families, schools, even recreational activities. It's like a normal town, except it's built on a continent where the temperature can drop low enough to freeze carbon dioxide. The Zilani biologist Tel 9 stared at the images in disbelief. These humans, they're living permanently in conditions that would require our species to evacuate entire planets. How is this possible? That's when Dr. Hyun-Woo Kim began explaining the real truth about Earth and human evolution. His voice remained calm and matter-of-fact, as if he were discussing the weather rather than revealing information that would revolutionize galactic understanding of human capabilities. Earth has gone through multiple ice ages throughout its history, he said. Periods lasting thousands of years where much of the planet was covered in ice sheets kilometers thick. The global temperature would drop so low that most of the world's water would freeze solid. These weren't just cold snaps or seasonal changes. These were planetary-scale freezing events that lasted longer than most civilizations. The aliens listened in stunned silence as Kim continued. Humans and our ancestors lived through all of that. Not just survived, but actually thrived and evolved during these ice ages. The cold didn't kill us. It made us stronger, more adaptable, better at generating and conserving heat. Biologist Yoon Ji-han joined the conversation, pulling up more images on her tablet. "Look at these pictures from Siberia," she said, showing them photos of humans living in what looked like a frozen wasteland. "This is where some humans choose to live permanently. The winter temperature regularly drops to -50 degrees Celsius. Children walk to school in this weather. People have jobs, build houses, raise families." She scrolled through more images showing human settlements in Alaska, northern Canada, Greenland, and other polar regions. Each picture showed the same thing: humans living normal lives in conditions that would be considered uninhabitable death zones by most galactic species. "Here's something that might interest you," Han said, showing them a video of human children playing in snow. "This was taken last winter in Seoul. Watch carefully." The video showed dozens of children, probably between 5 and 12 years old, running around in deep snow. They were building snowmen, having snowball fights, and sledding down hills. They were laughing and playing with pure joy, completely oblivious to the fact that they were surviving in conditions that would kill most adult aliens within minutes. The temperature that day was -15 degrees Celsius, Han explained. Those children were outside for hours. Their parents weren't worried about survival. They were worried about the kids getting their clothes too wet or staying out past dinner time. The revelation hit the aliens like a physical blow. They weren't just witnessing impressive cold tolerance or advanced survival skills. They were seeing the products of millions of years of evolution on a world so hostile that it had forged an entire species into living, breathing survival machines. Thex engineer Zix-7, who had been quietly listening while pressed against engineer Park for warmth, finally found his voice. "Your planet, Earth. According to these descriptions, it would be classified as a Class 12 death world by Galactic Coalition standards. Planets that hostile aren't supposed to produce sapient life. They're supposed to be sterile wastelands." Dr. Kim smiled in the darkness. "Earth is definitely challenging," he said, "but it's home, and it made us who we are. Every human carries the genetic memory of surviving ice ages, volcanic winters, and climate changes that would wipe out most species. We don't think of cold as an enemy to be fought with technology. We think of it as just another part of life to be adapted to." As the truth sank in, the aliens began to understand that everything they thought they knew about human limitations was wrong. These weren't just another species that had developed impressive technology. These were the products of a world so harsh that it had created beings who could treat a frozen hell world like an inconvenient camping trip. The galaxy was about to learn that humans didn't just come from a death world. They had been forged by it into something that made the impossible look easy. When the solar storm finally passed and power was restored to the base camp, the mission continued as if nothing extraordinary had happened. At least that's how the humans saw it. Dr. Hyunwoo Kim went back to reviewing scientific data, engineer So-Young Lee resumed her equipment maintenance, and geologist Ji-Ho Park continued collecting samples from the frozen landscape. To them, surviving the night had been just another part of the job, no different from dealing with bad weather during any other expedition. But for the alien crew members, everything had changed. They had witnessed something that challenged every assumption they had ever made about biology, survival, and the limits of organic life. As they resumed their duties, now heavily dependent on their restored heating systems, they couldn't stop thinking about what they had experienced. The first reports began filtering back to Coalition headquarters within days. Vorthak engineer Rixfor sent detailed technical analyses to his home crystal colonies, describing how humans had maintained stable body temperature without any technological assistance. His reports read like science fiction to other Vorthak engineers who struggled to understand how biological organisms could function as self-contained heating units. Zilani biologist Tel-9 transmitted even more dramatic accounts to the amphibious research centers on his homeworld. His descriptions of humans working with bare hands in lethal cold, of children playing in conditions that would freeze Zilani adults solid, spread through their scientific communities like wildfire. Marine biologists who had spent their entire careers studying adaptation in extreme environments found themselves questioning everything they knew about the limits of life. The insectoid Thex had perhaps the strongest reaction of all. Their hive mind communications carried the story across thousands of worlds simultaneously. Within hours, every Thex colony in Coalition space knew about the humans who had treated a frozen death world like a casual camping trip. The collective, Thex consciousness, which normally processed information with cold logic, found itself struggling to categorize what their crew members had witnessed. As word spread through Coalition networks, the story began to take on mythical proportions. Species that had never encountered humans before heard tales of beings who could survive in conditions that would shut down entire civilizations. Planets that required massive energy expenditures just to heat their cities during mild cold snaps learned about humans who considered -50°C to be chilly weather. Dr. Hyun-Woo Kim was completely unprepared for what happened next. His personal communication system began receiving messages from dozens of Coalition worlds. Research institutions wanted to study human cold resistance. Military organizations wanted to know if humans could survive on frozen battlefields where their enemies couldn't. Colonial development agencies asked if humans could establish settlements on ice worlds that other species had written off as uninhabitable. The requests confused Kim more than flattered him. When the Arcturus Science Council asked him to consult on extreme temperature survival techniques, he honestly didn't understand what they meant. To him, the techniques they were asking about were just common sense. Put on warm clothes when it's cold. Share body heat when necessary. Use available materials to block wind. Don't panic when things get difficult. I don't understand why everyone is so interested in basic winter survival, he told his team during their weekly meeting. It's like they're asking me to explain how to breathe or how to walk. Engineer So-Young Lee was having similar experiences. The Galactic Engineering Federation had requested detailed specifications for her advanced heating technology, apparently referring to the chemical heat packs she had distributed during the power failure. When she explained that they were simple, consumer products available in any sporting goods store on Earth, the engineers didn't believe her. They keep asking about the power source and the thermal output calculations, she told the team, laughing. I tried to explain that they're just iron powder and salt that react with oxygen, but they think I'm hiding some kind of revolutionary technology. Meanwhile, the mission on Kythera 7 continued to exceed all expectations. The human team had established the first permanent research station on the planet, working in conditions that other species could only survive with massive technological support. What made it even more remarkable was how efficiently they worked. While alien visitors needed constant monitoring of their heating systems and regular returns to heated shelters, the humans worked steadily through the day in their simple winter. Clothing communications specialist Min-Ho Choi had taken to giving informal tours to visiting alien dignitaries who came to see the impossible human settlement for themselves. These tours inevitably followed the same pattern. The aliens would arrive in elaborate environmental suits, expressing amazement that humans could survive on Kythera 7 at all. Then they would watch in stunned silence as Choi walked around the settlement in nothing more than a winter jacket, casually pointing out the various research facilities and living quarters. This is our main laboratory, he would say, standing outside in the howling wind while his alien guests huddled in their heated suits. We conduct geological and atmospheric research here year-round. The temperature rarely gets above -60, but it's quite comfortable once you get used to it. The aliens would look at each other in disbelief. Comfortable? They were surviving in their most advanced environmental protection systems, and this human was describing lethal cold as comfortable. Biologist Yoon Ji-han had become something of a celebrity in Coalition scientific circles. Her research on human adaptation to extreme cold was being studied by xenobiologists across the galaxy. What fascinated them most was that humans weren't just surviving through technological advancement. They were thriving through biological adaptation that had been shaped by millions of years of evolution on what the Coalition had classified as a death world. The most remarkable thing, Han explained in her reports back to Earth, is that they don't understand why we're remarkable. To them, every species should be able to survive in conditions like this. They can't comprehend that most life in the galaxy is much more fragile than they assumed. As months passed on Kythera 7, the human settlement grew and prospered. They built permanent structures, established regular supply runs, and even started families on the frozen world. What had been intended as a temporary research outpost became a thriving community where humans lived and worked in conditions that other species considered uninhabitable. The impact on Coalition space was profound. Suddenly, planets that had been written off as too cold for colonization were being reconsidered. If humans could establish permanent settlements on Cathera 7, what other impossible worlds might be suitable for human habitation? The galaxy's understanding of what constituted a habitable planet expanded dramatically. But perhaps the most significant change was in how other species viewed humans themselves. No longer were they seen as just another technological species that had achieved spaceflight. They were recognized as something unique in the galaxy, beings who had been forged by a world so hostile that it had created natural survivors, creatures who could treat the impossible as merely inconvenient. The humans on Cathera 7 remained largely oblivious to their legendary status. They continued their research, maintained their settlement, and lived their lives much as they would have anywhere else. To them, they were just doing their jobs. But across Coalition space, their names were spoken with awe and respect, as the beings who had proven that sometimes evolution creates something so remarkable that it defies all expectations. The galaxy had learned that when a death world tries to kill a species for millions of years, sometimes instead of destroying them, it creates legends,